This program was made possible in part by a grant from the Alaska Center for Excellence in Journalism. And viewers like you. Gnalchish, how thank you.
Metlakatla is a little Indian village in southeastern Alaska, just south of Ketchikan.
The name Metlakatla is just, well, it came from old Metlakatla, BC, and Metlakatla is pronounced Metlakatla. That means a real quiet channel, just the opposite of what you see here.
Well, when I was a lad in Metlakatla, I heard Sm'algyax from my great grandmother, my oldest Fanny Haldane, and then I had lessons from Arnold Booth in elementary school. He would come to our classroom when I was in second grade and teach us a Dao, our oral histories, and teach us some Sm'algya. And that was really my first introduction into what it means to be Tsimshian, and that I thought I was Tsimshian. I didn't really know what it meant before that.
Growing up, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, her maiden name was Clara Ridley from Metlakatla, and she taught me, ever since I was a little girl, a lot of phrases, words and phrases that I learned. Yeah, I was lucky to have her willing to speak it. I could remember her and some other people speaking Sm'algyax and laughing, and I'd say, "What did you say?" And so that kind of got my interest. I want to know what they're talking about.
I grew up with it. My grandmother was one of the original pioneers who moved across from Canada. She was 6 years old at the time, and she never did learn English, so she says. I think she used to look at me and my friends when we were talking, and we wondered, but she never did speak the language except for a few words here and there.
Been living in the Seattle area my whole life, except for some early childhood roots in Metlakatla, Alaska.
I live nowhere near a Tsimshian community. In fact, I've never even been to one. And that means I really haven't been influenced by any Tsimshian culture or even learned it.
I grew up far from my traditional Tsimshian territory. I'm Tsimshian on my father's side. I know that my grandmother, his mother, spoke Sm'algya fluently based on the stories that he and my aunt told me.
Language is extremely special to me because it was always here. It's what my grandmother spoke, it's what my grandfather spoke, it's what my great-grandparents did, and my great-great-great-great-great-grandparents until it was ripped away.
When I was around 4 or 5 years old, that time I was in Metlakatla was actually the first time that my grandpa, his name was Lawrence, actually introduced me to Sm'algya. To be quite honest, I never really knew as I grew beyond that the language was accessible. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so not really in Tsimshian community. Of course, I knew my family, but they don't speak the language either. So I it wasn't something that I really had a lot of access to.
There was more people like me who just didn't see the value of what they had. And as the older generation passed away, there were fewer and fewer people to fill the void that they left of the language. And then we found ourselves in a heck of a pickle. Then I realized that this pretty important situation I'm in here right now. And I look around and I realize more and more how many we're losing with each year. And we need more younger ones coming up to do it. And so it was quite a realization. I have a phrase I just coined, "Gach zept," just do it. That seems to be the attitude. We can't wait.
Without a doubt, Alfie Price, he's been kind of, I was looking at some notes I took down here and I put Alfie Price, the Rock.
We're not here to tell you a right way or a wrong way to do things. We're here to work together to keep our language in the air where we can hear it. That's where the language belongs. It doesn't belong in books.
Man, he had us, didn't matter if it was Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve. I think even this last year, I think we got together on Christmas Day.
Our very first meeting was in a church basement on a cold, snowy November morning. There was a snowstorm the night before, and I didn't think anyone was going to come. At first, there were 3 adults, my son, who was 8 at the time, and a toddler. And that was our very first day. There was just the 5 of us. And then, of course, when COVID hit us, we had to stop meeting in person.
We're lucky that Alfie, he's very, very good on computers and technical stuff. So when we had to stay home, rather than say, well, we can't do this anymore, we just started doing Zoom. And then from there, holy cow, we started kind of putting it on Facebook. Hey, we're meeting on Saturdays. We had more and more people that wanted to join from Canada, from British Columbia, from Washington State, Ketchikan, Anchorage. There's no limits. So all of a sudden we've got this big language community.
One of my students, she kept track of all of the classes that go on in the period of a month's time in Sm'algya. There's about 100. My mouth fell open. Whoa, look at us.
Zera simluem gordon tluxasi. Stop. Zera simluem gordon tluxasi. Stop.
I'm a gun flag. Bruno de Wayu. Blaine de Wilzogu. Ada Mogali de Noyu. Skudushu. Logwil Skudushu.
Shipping starts on the shot yet we have shoe line shoe.
I am logging in from Boise, Idaho,
and here are some of the words that I've been learning. Okay, here we go. Dara, Tiwayu. Ishbu Wadu, Dipdegu.
Yay. Aluban. Sabi. Kilo. Yaniki. Good girl.
I'm a gun flag. I'm just about to start my shift at work. I don't really have an opportunity to use language at work, but these are some of the ways that I've kind of incorporated it into my day-to-day life. Here's some examples of the notes that I scribble to myself sometimes. While I'm at work, I don't want to forget what I was thinking about, so I write it down. On my lunch break, I'll look up the words, look up sentence structure.
Am golusim kem go Noon gandu am godu Tlako bagalaha Alkem dim diwalai dal Kaskan will see bin Gilon zach bagana sakagem kuda koi.
When the world was locked down due to this global pandemic, I saw on Facebook that the Juneau Sm'algyax Learners Group put out a call for, early learners, for complete beginners. And I just remember reading this very kind of welcoming message, and it was like, don't be afraid, we're all learners. The ancestors will just be thrilled that you are learning Sm'algyax. And locked down at home in isolation, I thought, okay, I'm gonna give it a try. And I remember I was scared.
We remember what that felt like because we were all in that exact same position when we first started. Lots of influences keep us back from learning and being able to speak our languages, and not just physically speaking with your mouth, but there's a mental and spiritual blockage. When you try to make the unique sounds, we have several unique sounds that don't exist in Tsimshian in English. And it can be frightening. There are a couple of our learners whose parents or grandparents spoke Sm'algyax, but then had to stop for whatever reason. My grandmother was one of them. My great-grandmother was fluent and would mainly speak in Sm'algyax. My grandmother would listen to her and understand and respond in English. But she had gone to a boarding school and one of those who was punished for using the language, so she didn't use it.
When you're doing language reclamation work, you kind of have to learn how our words were taken from us and the ways colonial violence were used against us, and exactly how the language became so endangered.
One day before class, I'd mentioned Bob. Bob is older than me. He's my mother's age. He went to elementary school with my mom, and they were class rivals. They were always trying to be the smartest kid in school. And at that time, he had learned some Sm'algyax from his mother and his aunties. And if they used some Sm'algyax in the classroom, and this is in Metlakatla, Alaska, they would be punished. And he told me that he had to stand at the blackboard, draw a circle, and then put his nose in it and stand there for the whole class period. And it was humiliating. The teachers were very forceful about making them not, they call it speaking Indian. They didn't want them speaking Indian. He was telling me these things that happened, and I could really feel the hurt and the pain that he was going through. And so he had a lot of trouble physically making these sounds. He tried so hard. He what do they call them? Dormant speakers. When somebody heard a lot of language and then they never use it and they can understand a lot of it. But he just could not. And it was an emotional struggle.
The year 2018, late 2018, 2019, I started having some really severe mental health struggles. I think that was my first actual nervous breakdown. And I didn't really have a good understanding what was going on. I knew that I wasn't okay. And I started getting help and I noticed I was getting better. And as I was healing, I started noticing that I was hitting some walls. The same time frame, the George Floyd protests started coming up. And so connecting with culture and addressing past harms became a more dominant conversation. And I started noticing I was walking a little bit more toward claiming my indigenous identity more than I had before.
I didn't know what Sm'algyax was. I kind of vaguely in the back of my mind knew that it was a language that my great-grandfather was fluent in. My family has never been involved with culture. I never really bothered to explore it.
I know that language and culture are inextricable. They are closely connected, and you can't have one without the other. With the Indian Act and the potlatch ban and the enormous racism and misunderstanding by the settlers of indigenous peoples and ways, I really had no exposure to the language.
Living here in Juneau, this is not Tsimshian territory, and this is the exact experience most of our learners abroad have. They haven't come up in our Gotsup, in our ancestral homes. They haven't had the experience of being immersed in Sm'algyax. They haven't had the experience of keeping a smokehouse fire going when you're a child. They haven't had these experiences that our grandparents and ancestors had just as part of life.
Hi, Dara here. I've been asked to document kind of what I've been learning in my Tsimshian class and kind of how I go about that.
With Sm'algya comes everything. With Sm'algya comes our history, it comes our protocols, our singing, our healing, our ceremony, our families, our harvesting. It is everything.
Nunahon danamiupu. You are the fish to my rice.
I wish to live in that world and to at least help build it in whatever way I can.
You know, we're losing fluent speakers faster than we can create them, right? So while they're still here, it's really important that we all kind of, you know, pull up our socks and get busy.
Probably the earliest champion, I guess you could say, for the language would be Mr. Russell Hayward from Metlakatla.
This is Russell Hayward on the date of February the 21st, Thursday, 1980. I am recording on cassette tape. WAAS, West, rain in Tsimshian. West in Tsimshian means rain. Now we have the apostrophe B, which hits the B a little harder, and is pas to grow, pas. Apostrophe BAS to grow. The next word is alt. Just release real sharply. Alt. Apostrophe BALT. Alt means gloves.
Orthographies were developed for all kinds of native languages, and the one that was developed for the Tsimshian just didn't set well with some of the elders there in Metlakatla because it seemed difficult to read, and it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. So they got together and they devised their own orthography, is now known as the Alaska orthography. And that's the one that I use today. When I was looking at different methods of teaching, I came across this one. It's called Total Physical Response, and it mimics the way a child learns their first language, a little toddler, 3, 4-year-old. Now we launch into what Sm'algyax in motion is. Yan, Daksham Heitgen. Yan, Daksham Heitgen. Tquayeltskin. This little thing up here is again. Gik Tquayeltskin. Tquayeltskin. Gik Tquayeltskin. Yan, Daksham Heitgen. One of the pioneers, the one that really got me and some other folks interested, was Donna Mae Roberts. We call her Tidza. The nice thing about it, getting my first really formal introduction into the language, she said, I don't want you to write this down. I don't want you to try to say it, but I want you to know what I'm telling you in a command. Gikauyu, I'll do that again. Yan, Daksham Heitgen. Yan, Daksham Heitgen. Yan, Daksham Heitgen. Yan, Tquayeltskin. Yan, Tquayeltskin. Gik Tquayeltskin. Tan, Dalachetli Welsh. Tan, Dalachetli Welsh. Yan, Yan, Yan. Waiwa.
There was a phrase that I learned on that very first Zoom session with the Juneau Sm'algyax learners. And the phrase was Num na Welt, which means it's ours or it belongs to us.
We can get this kind of imposter syndrome, like, since we're not immersed in the language and culture, that maybe we don't deserve it. And plus, we're all exposed to Western ideals of what language and culture is supposed to be. And so to come at learning Sm'algyax or any indigenous language really and culture from a Western lifestyle, which I did, it can feel a little disingenuous. So that was a really hard pill for a lot of us to swallow.
I tell my students is there's power in speaking the words of our old people, because the old people, look what they lived through. They were totally on their own. They were totally self-sufficient. They knew how to survive and they knew how to thrive. Just by using the words that they did, you're stronger already because it's part of your identity. And that's what we need. We need to connect. We need to know who we are.
It's a healing journey for us to become whole through our languages. Our languages give us an insight into the worldview of our ancestors. They teach us a lot, these languages. So I need it. I need Sm'algya.
This Zoom, all of us on Zoom, we had 22 people on Zoom. And I realized, I said, oh my gosh, it feels like a family, like a community.
GY is same as in English, get, people. School, child. N-A-G-W-A-A-T, Nagwat is another word for father. D, as it's the same as in English, dash, ant, dash, you say. I-H-L-A-I, you say means blood.
The Juneau Sm'algyax Learners isn't funded by grant money, and so it's led by our people for our people, for Tsimshian people. This is a family.
I guess our number one rule is S'm'algyax is the boss. Our language is the boss. There's no authority that we bow to or single teacher or method that we think is the right way to do it. Being a group without a head, a boss, allows us to each bring what we know from wherever we learned it together, and it strengthens us all.
Dem Veldum, de Gashgouden de Achbum, dem Hoyam, de Lepelgigum. We must try, no matter how much ability we have, to use our own language.
I'm learning a lot of Sm'algyax with my Noyu on Saturdays.
Oh. Skurks. Amachstogen. Have a good sleep.
This program was made possible in part by a grant from the Alaska Center for Excellence in Journalism. And viewers like you. Gnalchish, how thank you.